Live from London, this is BBC News. China hits back against President Trump's tariffs by imposing its own levies on America. It's a new phase in the Washington-Beijing trade war. Israel says it's sending a delegation to Doha for further Gaza ceasefire talks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington to meet President Trump. Detecting breast cancer with artificial intelligence. A world-leading trial is being launched in England. El Salvador offers to take prisoners held in American jails, including those with US citizenship. And lawyers for convicted child serial killer Lucy Letby apply to have her case investigated as a potential miscarriage of justice. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. China has hit back as President Trump's new 10% tariffs on all Chinese exports to the US take effect. Beijing introducing a 15% tariff on imported coal and liquefied natural gas, as well as a 10% tax on imported crude oil, agricultural machinery, pickup trucks and large engine cars. They've placed export controls on 25 types of rare metal products and added PVH Corp, which is the holding company for Calvin Klein, among other brands, and US biotechnology company Illumina to its unreliable entities list. The country's anti-monopoly watchdog has also launched an investigation into Google. China saying the extra tariffs could come into force next Monday. Now, we are expecting President Trump to speak on the phone to Chinese leader Xi Jinping in the coming days. Let's take you to Shanghai now and speak to the country China director of the Asia Group, Han Xinlin. Very good to have you with us. Was this expected to some degree in China?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. And it's unfortunate that there's this tit for tat going on, but it was not unexpected. In fact, China had long been preparing for this under various types of scenarios. Essentially, they've got a wider set of tools available for retaliation, and they seem to believe that they're going to be able to respond quickly and that China has the ability to endure more pain as well. And so China is quite serious in this, as both China and the US posture themselves for what are going to be very serious negotiations.
Is the narrative in China, though, that it is the US that is going to lose more from this?
Well, interestingly, we're still in the last day of China's holiday, so it hasn't really registered as much in social media. In fact, ironically, what seems to have caught people's attention in China is the recent passing of a famous Taiwanese movie star and cultural icon. But we do understand that once China gets back into the work, there is going to be much more action. There's going to be much more sense of perhaps nationalist rhetoric that might be thrown into the discussion as well. But from what we've seen so far is this. The Chinese government, despite having a capacity to retaliate harder and faster, they seem to be taking a fairly measured approach so far. But we'll get to see how this plays out as we start entering the negotiation and as we see how the pressures of China's economy affects the negotiation process.
What are those pressures at the moment in the domestic situation? There's an issue around youth unemployment, for instance, and all those problems that there have been with the internal property market.
You're absolutely correct. China's very much concerned about the economy. Despite the fact that China reached its target of 5% GDP growth, the reality is on the ground it doesn't feel as such, largely because of things such as unemployment and job search. So as China realizes that there's going to be limits to its ability to export its way to GDP growth because of tariffs, that means they're going to have to refocus much more attention on the domestic economy, and certainly front and center is going to be the area of consumption.
Is there also going to be a move to not only decouple from the US, but to diversify more, look to other markets, particularly within the Asia-Pacific region?
That's very much true. If there's going to be limits to how much China can sell to the US, they're going to have to look closer at Europe, for example, but very much so they're reaching out to Southeast Asia, Latin America, parts of Africa as well. So in many ways, on top of trade, you're seeing a lot of soft power efforts, such as the Belt Road Initiative, to participate in infrastructure development. China knows it has to play a long game. And so in many ways, they're trying to position how they should do so. But on a day-to-day basis, the economy, jobs, getting consumer confidence is certainly very critical. And that's front and center and on the mind of the government officials as we start moving towards March, where there's going to be the major political event called the Two Sessions, which is going to set the roadmap of China's economic development plan.
And Shenlin, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for your insights.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Let's take you to the Middle East now. 2 Israeli soldiers have been killed, 6 others injured in a shooting attack on an army checkpoint in the occupied West Bank. It took place in the north in the Palestinian city of Tubas, and it comes as the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, you'll know them as UNRWA, has said a nearby camp in the city of Jenin is going in a catastrophic direction as the Israeli military continues its operation there. The army says it's killed 50 people there so far. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says the operation is aimed at ethnic cleansing and has called on the US to intervene. We have some latest pictures for you from the scene of today's attack at that army checkpoint. And to remind you as well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is right now in the United States and he's going to be meeting with President Trump later today. We are again at a critical juncture for the Gaza ceasefire and the next phases of that as well. So let's take you to Jerusalem and join our correspondent there, Wura Davis. First, Wura, can you put into context for us what is happening in Jenin at the moment?
Yeah, for all the relative calm in Gaza since the start of the ceasefire in the occupied West Bank, things have been going from worse to worse. According to local sources, more than 70 Palestinians have been killed since the start of January as a result mainly of the increased Israeli military activity against armed gangs like Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian militants in the city of Jenin. Israeli troops for several days now have been surrounding what's known as the Jenin refugee camp, destroying buildings and trying to flush out the militants, in their words. In other nearby parts of the West Bank, as you've just been saying there have been casualties over the last few weeks, including in the last few hours. An Israeli military patrol was ambushed. Several people were injured, and our understanding is that 2 soldiers have been killed, as well as the attacker. So a lot of tension in the occupied West Bank, but perhaps isn't getting as much attention as it might get because, of course, of the ongoing war in Gaza, despite the ceasefire there.
And while we're talking about that and the ceasefire, Wura, what are the expectations in Israel of this meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, due to take place in about 9 hours' time?
Well, some Israeli media outlets are calling it the most important meeting between a president and a prime minister for decades. That might be slightly overdoing it, but it shows what is at stake. And of course, now we're coming to the end of the first phase of the ceasefire in Gaza that's had tangible benefits: the release of 18 hostages, more than 500 Palestinian prisoners, more aid getting into Gaza, injured people getting out of Gaza, general support on both sides for a continuation of the ceasefire. But Mr. Netanyahu is perhaps reluctant. He's certainly got ministers to the right of him who want the war to resume, because their argument is that Hamas is not yet militarily defeated, and that has to be achieved before the war can end. Yet Mr. Trump, we know, wants the war to finish because he's got wider and bigger plans in the region, particularly trying to get some sort of historic deal with Saudi Arabia. So even though Mr. Trump is a very big ally of Israel, and I'm sure there'll be the mood music publicly will be very good, there are tensions between Mr. Trump and Netanyahu, and that sort of move to the vital second phase of the ceasefire is what is at stake.
Wura, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us from Jerusalem. Let's speak now to Dr. Doron Avital, who is a former Knesset member and former Israeli Special Forces commander as well. Dr. Avital, thank you very much for joining us. Wura just saying there that some in Israel say this meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump is one of the most important historically that we've seen. Not everyone agrees, but what's your view? How important do you see this meeting in Washington today as being?
No, I think it's critical. I think it comes in a critical junction in terms of the situation in Gaza, in terms of the hostage deal, in terms of the public opinion in favor of the hostage deal, and in terms of the political constraint in Israel, and in terms of the bigger picture in the Middle East concerning Trump's vision, not only his vision about the corridor, about Saudi Arabia normalization. Important point at stake, 3 points, the Gaza hostage deal and the fate of Gaza, Saudi Arabia normalization, and of course Iran that all the time looms in the background.
Does the Israeli public at the moment support the continuation of this ceasefire and the next phases?
I think they do. I think they do. You can hear different voices, but my feeling, those very emotional release of the women soldiers and then other captives, it really did something to the Israeli public. They really realized, maybe for the first time, how close in such a short distance the hostages are there and the possibility of seeing them back. I think there would be a real outcry in Israeli public if this won't go forward. And everybody understands the political constraint that Netanyahu is in, but I think there would be no forgiveness for him if it would seem as if we decided to break out of the framework of the deal. My feeling, the public is for the hostage deal.
But Dr. Avital, in terms of those political constraints you mentioned, if hardliners like Ben Gvir and Smotrich resign, can the Netanyahu's coalition government continue to stand?
Not for long. I mean, he is insured by the opposition, but Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, and Benny Gantz, the other leader in the opposition camp, that they would stand behind him in this deal. But in the long run, when you have to deliver the budget, by the way, also the Orthodox, not the religious Zionists, the Orthodox parties proclaimed that they declared that they would be behind the deal. But in the long run, if the extreme right wingers, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, leave the government, in the long run we'll go to election. It will be the collapse of the coalition. This is his fear. So he is maneuvering. His maneuvering space is very limited now between Trump, between the constraints here, between the public. Very little maneuvering space. Therefore, I think Trump is in a position to dictate to him, with Witkef's aid, how to go forward.
Can I ask you, Dr. Avital, about what is going on in the West Bank, which is how I started my conversation with Wira, and the UN saying, there is a dangerous escalation there, a catastrophic direction that the Jenin refugee camp is moving in. The Palestinian Authority Foreign Affairs Department have said civilians are being displaced under armed threat, entire neighbourhoods are being destroyed with explosives. They say there is a flagrant violation of international law taking place by the IDF in the occupied West Bank. What is the objectives of the IDF at the moment?
I think, first of all, we have to realize that Jenin and the northern Samaria was a hotbed of terror also before the 7th of October, and now it's picking up in a dangerous direction. It's true that there were a few weeks ago, there was an attempt to introduce the Palestinian Authority, the security forces of the Palestinian Authority, that they would instill some order and try to contain those terror acts. There is a fear that the energy, that if there's a ceasefire and it continues in Gaza, that the energy of terror would go to the northern Samaria. So Israel, it's a sort of a preemptive move, try to contain it. I don't think the displacement is something, it's also a local displacement in order to maneuver and to conduct the military operation. We don't have to read more than this to that, but the northern Samaria is an issue. We saw it today. We are trying to contain it. I hope it would work. Yes, it's a problem.
Dr. Avital, thank you very much for joining us. Later here on BBC News Now, we'll be getting the view from the occupied West Bank as well. So do stay with us for that. Coming up on the programme, we're also going to be talking about what is happening in El Salvador at the moment and a deal that's been made between El Salvador and the US to take prisoners. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Nearly 700,000 women across the UK are being recruited for a world-leading trial on breast cancer. Researchers are hoping they'll learn whether artificial intelligence can be used to speed up detection, and that could improve the rate of diagnosis and reduce waiting times. More from our health reporter, Jim Reid.
More than 3 million women in the UK are invited to a screening appointment for breast cancer each year. In a fraction of those cases, around 23,000, a tumour will be detected. Speeding up that process can increase survival rates and allow some cancer patients to have shorter and less invasive treatment. Some hospitals have already started using artificial intelligence tools to analyse scans like these and spot tiny tumours. Now, the government has said women already booked in for routine screenings will be invited to take part in a major trial of the technology across the country. Almost 700,000 women will be enrolled in the study over the next 4 years. It will take place over 30 testing sites across the UK. And it's designed to compare 5 different types of commercially available AI software.
Detecting cancer earlier makes it more treatable. And so what we're trying to do is help those imaging specialists to be more accurate, but also to free up their time so that they can spend time on those other really important activities in the NHS and helping those women and patients.
Cancer doctors and radiologists welcomed the launch of the trial, saying that AI has immense potential in diagnosis. But they also warned of large staffing gaps in cancer care today and said there's an urgent need to build up the workforce. The government is expected to launch a new cancer strategy for England over the summer. Jim Reid, BBC News.
I'm pleased to say we're joined by Fiona Gilbert, who is a consultant radiologist and professor at Cambridge University. She is the joint lead of this trial. Fiona, how excited are you about the potential of what you're trialling?
Well, we're delighted this trial has been funded. It's taken us about 2 years to put together a team of people, and we're really fortunate NIHR, the HTA body funded by the government, has decided to put £11 million behind it. So we're just thrilled. We're absolutely thrilled.
What do you think the biggest impact will be?
Well, what we're hoping, as Shan Taylor-Phillips was saying, is that we think it's going to make us more accurate. Currently, we've got these 2 people reading 2.2 million mammograms each year, and actually, we think that the one person working with AI will be able to match that performance or even make us slightly better.
And how crucial is early detection when it comes to breast cancer?
Absolutely essential, because early detection means you're finding it smaller, you get less mutilating operations, you can just remove the lump often, then some radiotherapy. So our outcomes are much better when you find it early compared to finding it later.
And are these kind of trials with AI happening in other parts of the world as well?
Yeah, there's good trials, good evidence has already come out from Sweden, so that's excellent, but it was only using one particular machine type of mammography and only one AI tool. Norway's about to start a big trial, there's some studies going on in America as well. But we're the only country really able to take such a big cohort of women, compare women who are being x-rayed by different machines and compare 5 different AI tools.
Fiona, what are the concerns about the trial and about AI that people might express to you?
Well, I think the public are understandably suspicious of AI, so what we've made sure is that it'll always be a human reading with the AI. The public are worried that we're going to give the data away to the companies who develop these tools. In this trial, we will always hold the data. The companies will not be allowed to keep the data. And so we think that's really important to try and reassure people. In this study, what we're going to do is tell everybody we're going to be using the AI and allow women to opt out. So we'll have it in the invitation letter, on big notices in the screening vans and things. So if people are really concerned, we'd like them to tell us why they're concerned so that we can modify how we might use AI in the future.
Good luck with the trial. Fiona Gilbert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's update you on some other stories making the headlines right around the world. President Trump has suggested US aid for Ukraine may in future be exchanged for rare earth minerals. Now, they're crucial for making goods like electric cars and mobile phones. The idea was originally put forward last year by President Zelensky. A second woman has confirmed to have died in flooding, which has inflicted incredible devastation on communities in northern Australia. An 82-year-old woman's body was found in Queensland on Tuesday, 2 days after a 63-year-old woman died when a dinghy she was in overturned during a rescue attempt. The region has been inundated since Saturday, with parts of northern Queensland seeing nearly 2 metres of rain. Scientists say they've developed a technique that allows them to monitor tiny Antarctic krill from space. The crustaceans, which are just a few centimetres long, are a key food source for marine wildlife, including whales, seals and seabirds. The researchers want to monitor how climate change and fishing are affecting the creatures. America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, says El Salvador has offered to take prisoners that are currently being held in American jails, including those with US citizenship. The deal, which designated El Salvador a safe country for asylum seekers and other migrants, was suspended by the Biden administration 4 years ago. Mr. Rubio has praised El Salvador's President Bukele for his policies tackling gang violence, which have dramatically reduced crime rates in El Salvador, but have been criticised by human rights groups. Let's speak now to William Marquez, who joins me from BBC Mundo. William, interesting story, this one. Why are El Salvador doing it?
Well, first of all, you have to consider that Bukele is considered a key ally of the US. And as you say, President Trump singled him out and singled him for his admiration, the way he has treated the security problem in El Salvador by rounding up these very dangerous criminals and cleaning up the streets. However, economically, he's not doing that well. So in his second term, he was promised growth, and he might get that by more or less dancing to the US tune.
So do we have any details of what kind of agreement has been done between El Salvador and the US over these prisoners?
Well, initially, it's been, he has agreed to receive deported migrants from anywhere, any country, not just Salvadorians. However, he extended this offer by saying that he would receive dangerous convicted criminals, even if they were residents or US citizens. And he's doing this because he will be able to fund his very complex security and prison system. He has this huge mega prison which houses these dangerous criminals. But he's going to do it for a fee.
Okay. Yeah, we're waiting to find out what that fee is. But this mega prison that you described, and how else has he managed to tackle gang violence, which has been a real issue there, and organised crime too?
Yes, it was, particularly because these gangs called maras had overrun Salvador completely. And so first of all, he he declared an emergency situation. It's been in place for 2 years. He created this mega prison that houses 440,000 inmates, which at the moment houses 15,000, so there's space for many more. And it's a very strict prison. He has cleaned up the streets, and he has gained a lot of popularity because of that.
Yeah, how is his popularity? What's happening in El Salvador politically at the moment?
Well, he got re-elected overwhelmingly because of this security situation. He has, in effect, brought security back in El Salvador. But, as I said before, he has problems with the economy, which he could get some help with.
William, thank you. Scientists from NASA and the European Space Agency are monitoring a recently detected asteroid that they say has a small chance of colliding with Earth in 7 years. Astronomers estimate the space rock is roughly the size of a football field, as Rebecca Morell now reports.
Asteroid 2024 YR4 was first spotted by a telescope at the end of last year. It's not that huge. It's estimated to be between 40 and 90 metres wide, and it's been found to have a very small chance of hitting the Earth at just over 1% on the 22nd of December 2032. Now, even though this is a tiny risk, this space rock now tops the list of the most dangerous asteroids. Scientists use the Torino scale to measure potential impact, which runs from 0 to 10.
0 means no problem, not going to hit. 3 means maybe we'll hit, but really we just need more observations. If the number ever gets up to 8, 9, or 10, then people should worry. But right now this object is a 3 on the Torino scale. And all that means is that astronomers like me and my colleagues were paying attention.
Although there's a lot of uncertainty, the data so far suggests an impact corridor that extends across South America, the Atlantic Ocean, Africa and South Asia. So what damage could a collision cause? Well, in 1908, a similar-sized asteroid hit a remote patch of forest in Siberia, and this was the result. Millions of trees were felled across an area of 800 square miles. A strike like this on a city could be catastrophic. Now, we know the asteroid has an elliptical orbit and it's currently moving away from us. So telescopes on Earth and in space will be observing it while it's visible over the next few weeks. The hope is the risk will be downgraded. But if that's not the case, there is another option. In 2022, a NASA test mission smashed into another asteroid and changed its orbit, proving that a space rock can be deflected. Scientists have spotted seemingly dangerous asteroids in the past, but after gathering more data, they've realised they're no threat. So we'll see if that's the case for this space rock too.
Rebecca Morell there. Do stay with us here on BBC News Now. This is BBC News. The headlines. The UN says a West Bank refugee camp is going in a catastrophic direction as an Israeli operation has killed at least 70 Palestinians so far. It comes as Israel is sending a delegation to Doha for further Gaza ceasefire talks, while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington and will be meeting President Trump. China hits back against President Trump's tariffs by imposing its own levies on America. It's a new phase in the Washington-Beijing trade war. Lawyers for convicted child serial killer Lucy Letby apply to have her case investigated as a potential miscarriage of justice. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Good to have you with us on BBC News Now. Let's bring you more on the escalating tensions in the occupied West Bank and also today's meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. That's happening in Washington in about 8.5 hours' time, we understand. But let's take you to the Palestinian city of Ramallah. We can speak to Dalal Erekat, who is an associate professor of diplomacy and conflict resolution at the Arab American University. Thank you so much for joining us. UNRWA today saying what's happening in Jenin is catastrophic. What is it like at the moment in the occupied West Bank, and what are you hearing from Jenin?
Well, this is a reminder to the whole world that Palestine lives under a military occupation of the Israelis for the past 7 decades. After reaching the ceasefire, Israel did not seize any moment but to invade, block, and raid every Palestinian city. But what's happening in Jenin, and specifically in the north, Jenin, Tulkarem, and Tubas, and under the pretext of the refugee camps, under the pretext of, getting rid of Hamas or resistance, they are literally forcibly displacing all the civilians. They are attacking the city centers, the infrastructure, the water pipelines, no electricity, no teachers, no nurses, no students are allowed to reach their schools or universities or hospitals. So basically, the Israeli military authorities are suffocating the Palestinian civilians in the West Bank from the north to Bethlehem and Hebron. Yet, there is the pretext and the justification that everything is for security reasons, while in fact, all the residents of the Jenin refugee camps, around 20,000 civilians, were forcibly displaced in the past couple of days. 75% of the residents of Tulkarem refugee camp as well were also forcibly displaced. Please, sorry.
Yes, no, just that the Israelis say this is not a pretext. They say that these refugee camps are a hotbed for militant jihadists and also for terrorists. That is that they're going in to try and put an end to that activity.
Well, thank you very much. Yet I would argue that this is a pretext. This is a justification, like they did the same scenario they did in Gaza. Why would they, for example, carpet the streets, the city centers? Why would they cut the water pipelines and the electricity? Why would they hinder the possibility and the rights of every civilian impossible? The deprivation level of every civilian's rights is unparalleled to history in Palestine. And not only in Jenin. If you look in Jericho, in Bethlehem, in Hebron, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, all the Palestinians are suffocated. Every Palestinian is target. Between every Palestinian community, you will find checkpoints, you will find iron gates and cement blocks. You know that it has mounted to more than 900 checkpoints and military barrages to make our lives in Palestine really literally miserable. So after the genocide that is being now conducted at the ICJ against Israel does not seize any moment in attacking the Palestinians, confiscating more lands, annexing more lands. We are facing a de facto annexation of the Palestinian land.
Professor Erekat, can I ask you about the meeting taking place in Washington this evening between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu? What is the Palestinian view of whether any agreement is going to be reached to continue the ceasefire in Gaza, to implement the next phases?
Well, we have warned several times that unless a political comprehensive framework is adopted into this deal, no sustainability can be guaranteed. Yet, when Trump speaks about his goal of bringing stability and peace to the region, then yes, he has a chance. He has a chance of making sure that he is himself the guarantor of the sustainability of those agreements. But while Netanyahu chooses to fly to meet Trump and then cancels the beginning of the negotiations of the second phase, this in itself is a violation to the ceasefire agreement that the mediators, talking about the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the American Trump administration. So to start with, Trump needs to walk his talk when he talks about peace, prosperity, and stability and security to the Middle East. He needs to hold Netanyahu accountable, and he needs himself to make sure that this ceasefire agreement sustains, not only in the return of the hostages and the prisoners exchange, but also for the sustainability of the ceasefire, for the withdrawal of the Israeli military troops from Gaza, and for the Palestinian people's political admirations and inspirations of their right to self-determination and in living in liberty, dignity, and statehood.
Professor Okai, thank you very much for joining us from Ramallah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk about tariffs again. The 10% tariffs on all Chinese goods entering the US has kicked in. Beijing warning there were no winners in a trade war and says it will take the case to the World Trade Organization. President Trump and Xi Jinping are due to have talks later in the week. Now, this all comes as Donald Trump has delayed the imposition of tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. The leaders of both countries have agreed to strengthen border controls to clamp down on migration and drug trafficking into the US. The first announcement came from Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, who said she'd agreed to reinforce Mexico's northern border with 10,000 additional troops to help them stem drug smuggling. And then we had a phone call, a couple of them actually, between Mr. Trump and Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, agreeing to reinforce his country's border with the US to clamp down on migration and the flow of fentanyl. Let's speak now to Professor of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, Drew Fagan. Drew, good to have you with us. Earlier in the programme, I was speaking to someone in China who was saying they were sort of expecting these tariffs, feeling reasonably philosophical about it. I have family in Canada. I wonder if you could explain to us just how outraged Canadians are about what is going on.
So we have had free trade with the United States for 35 years. We began negotiating 40 years ago. And the ties between the two countries, historic ties beyond economic, but also the economic ties are deep. But we have a challenge in the sense that although the United States to some extent depends on Canada for its prosperity, we just depend far more on them for our prosperity. Our trade ties are very deep. And as a result, what's happened over the last few weeks has, I wouldn't say shattered necessarily, but really shaken our confidence in the United States as an ally and friend, an economic partner.
Is it deeper than that, though, Drew? We've seen booing at hockey games, at basketball games as well. And it doesn't feel like it's just about the tariffs. It's the rhetoric coming from Donald Trump, the talk about Canada becoming a 51st state.
We're a sovereign country. And for him to be trolling us in this way has outraged Canadians, absolutely. And there are real questions about our relationship far more broadly than just trade relations. You know, there are issues between our two countries. There always are issues of defense spending, security at the border, but there's something to be negotiated. There are issues with regard to, for example, guns coming north, or frankly, fentanyl coming north. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was a bit of a shakedown. And as a result, the anger is very evident. As you mentioned, you know, the United States national anthem has been booed at hockey games and basketball games. This is wild stuff and totally unnecessary in the context of, you know, the deep ties we have.
Drew, what about the White House, the new White House yesterday saying they've been misrepresented? This is not a trade war with Canada, it's a drug war. They're kind of trying to reframe it a bit. How has that gone down in the US? I mean, you've just mentioned fentanyl. Very little fentanyl comes in from Canada to the United States.
It's viewed as a pretext. And part of the challenge is that we don't really know what the president wants. Of course, there are all sorts of actions he's taking domestically that are shaking up Washington. So I guess in some sense, why wouldn't he try to shake up his closest partner and friend? But it still feels just beyond the pale with regard to bilateral relations. You know, we do have a renegotiation of the USMCA, the free trade agreement, including Mexico as well, due next year. And it feels like this is a first step towards that, but it's not really the way you negotiate. In a responsible way. We do have issues. We want to deepen those ties. There are things we can do together better with regard to energy, with regard to critical minerals, with regard to technology. There's lots of thinking going on in Canada with regard to that. But all that has been put on hold due to, you know, as I say, capriciousness.
And just briefly, in terms of border security and what's been agreed, is there anything actually new here that Canada's now promising the US? Because I thought these were proposals that were put in place weeks ago.
That's essentially the case. Before President Trump took power a couple of weeks ago, Prime Minister Trudeau did go down to Mar-a-Lago and he made offers with over $1 billion in additional spending at the border. But of course, we've been working closely with the United States on border security going back to 9/11 or even before 9/11. There really isn't anything new here in what was announced yesterday. And, you know, the kind of things that we can negotiate generally on an ongoing basis.
Professor Drew Fragan, great to get your thoughts. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The latest there and the sentiments of Canadians from Toronto with Drew Fragan. Lawyers for the convicted child serial killer Lucy Letby have applied for her case to be investigated as a potential miscarriage of justice. The 35-year-old former nurse is serving 15 whole life sentences after she was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 7 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital between June 2015 and June 2016. The Criminal Cases Review Commission says work has already begun to assess the case. Let's speak to our correspondent Nick Garnett. Nick, good to see you. Just bring us up to date with the latest.
Well, a lot of the criticism of Lucy Letby's conviction has been that there was no smoking gun. No one saw her carrying out the crimes. She was convicted on a raft of evidence. What we are hearing now is that her defence claims that it has its own smoking gun in terms of new evidence that needs to be considered by the courts. Now, the process that will go through, it's already been through the appeal courts and failed there, is that the defence team are going to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to ask for it to force the case back to the appeal court and to be heard there. So what new evidence have they come up with? Well, today we've heard from a former neonatologist, a man called Dr. Shu Li, who has brought together 14 experts from around the world who have been looking at all 14 cases. They're the 7 murders and the 7 attempted murders. They say that from what they have found, no criminality took place at all. There was no crime, there was no murder. They have blamed poor skills in the hospital, poor plumbing in the hospital, poor decision-making when it came to the treatment of some of the children. They admitted that what the parents of those children will be hearing today would be upsetting. They said they didn't want to add to their distress, but they pointed out that there simply wasn't the case that there had been any criminality involved. Now, the question is this new and is it high enough evidence to be considered by the Criminal Cases Review Commission? They have today accepted that they've been served papers by Letby's defence team and that they are now going to consider it. They're going to set up a panel to look at it. If that passes the watermark, the watershed mark of it being new evidence, they will then pass the case back to the appeal court, which will then consider the case again. But if it's not, then Letby will continue to spend the rest of her life behind bars for the murders of those 7 children and the attempted murders of another 7.
Nick, thank you. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's take you to Ukraine now, where a British aid worker has become a hero after the video with his story went viral. Ed from Dorset, he's known as Eddie, was evacuating civilians from the front line in Pokrovsk when a Russian drone attacked his team, despite their van having a clear civilian marking. Now, Ed lost his left arm and leg, but he did manage to survive, having rescued several civilians before the shelling. So Ed is now in hospital, but he managed to speak to me from his hospital bed just a few hours before he had surgery.
We entered Pokrovsk, which was the town we're working in, so mid-morning. One of our jobs is to refill the generators that power the mobile networks in town. So we do that so locals can get signal to request evacuations. As we were doing that, we met 5 people who wanted to evacuate. The first group of 3 people and a dog had walked out after they'd walked out from the front line, like literally the 0 line, after their house had been destroyed that morning. Like 10 minutes before we exited the town, there was a couple, two people on bikes, civilians. So we opened the door to give them evacuation leaflets. At that point, I heard a drone. 30 seconds later, there was a mighty bang, explosion right in front of my face. I tried putting the car into gear, and my left leg just wasn't doing anything. I tried turning the wheel, and I could feel my shoulder moving, but I could see my arm on the wheel not moving. And it was at that point I was like, okay, this is bad. This is really bad. And I looked down and just saw my left leg was just absolutely shredded. I won't go into too much detail about that, but yeah, it was bad. And then my team lead came around to my side of the vehicle, pulled me out, got a tourniquet on me, saved my life.
Eddie, was it clear that you were an aid volunteer and the car you were in, the van
yes.
you were in? Yeah. And
yeah,
that sound of the drone above you, was that also a familiar sound? Are you used to drones being in the sky?
Yeah, Pokrovsk is littered with drones. There's every time we go in, we see them. We have several detectors, and neither of those went off before the strike, which leads us to think that it could have been a fiber optic, which is a new drone, a much more dangerous type of drone they've been using recently, because it's undetectable and pretty much impossible to counter. But we were in a white armored vehicle with evacuation and volunteer written very clearly on it. It was absolutely zero doubt as to who we are or what we were doing. By making it very clear this was a war crime. This is a war crime.
Eddie, you're from Dorset. What are you doing in
Yes.
Ukraine? Why have you chosen to go there?
I was a sailor for a long time before I came out to Ukraine. And when the full scale started, I saw it. I saw everything kicking off, and I thought I had to go help somehow, but I wasn't really in a position at that point. So I waited a few months, spoke to a few more people, and found out about the humanitarian side of things. And after speaking to people, I was told that the best option would be to just buy a vehicle and drive out. So I did that. And so October 22, I first arrived in Ukraine, and I've been living there since. I've done a few trips out back to sea just to earn money, but I've been full-time living in Ukraine since October 22.
What's kept you there, Eddie? Why have you stayed?
The most incredible people, to be honest. I mean, this incident, or this what's happened recently, has just shown me, has made me realise that I'm making the right choice by being here. The amount of support from people has been incredible. I have amazing friends here. I have family. I have a goddaughter, Ukrainian goddaughter here, who's 8 months old. People have made commitments to me, so I've made commitments to Ukraine. It's my home.
And how does it feel for you, Eddie, knowing that you are now considered a hero by many Ukrainians?
I hate that. I hate being called a hero. I hate that. I'm an idiot with morals. There's a difference. I don't like being called a hero. I'm doing what 100 other people are doing. I'm doing what 1,000 other Ukrainians are doing without getting any of the any of the recognition that us Westerners get. I'm an idiot with morals, and yeah.
Eddie from Dorset speaking to me from his hospital bed in Ukraine. The actor Mikey Madison's breakout performance in the film Anora has been getting substantial awards buzz. The relatively unknown 25-year-old has been nominated for Best Actress at all the major ceremonies. She's been talking to Lisa Mazimba.
Do you want to get married to me, Vanya? You want me to be your little wifey?
The film starts out feeling like a fairy tale for Anora.
It is now my great...
A stripper turned sex worker, she marries the son of a Russian oligarch. But Anora, Annie to her friends, finds not everyone is happy about it.
This is not a real marriage. We're getting in annulled and you have no say in it.
Annie is an incredible blend of both fragility and strength. As an actor, you must love being able to play those extremes.
Yes, of course. I recognized from the beginning that she's a very complicated character, very nuanced. I always felt that she was someone who was very vulnerable on the inside, but is constantly covering it up with this hardness or an aggression. But I do think that she's quite soft inside.
It's not just Mikey Madison's performance. The film itself has been one of the most celebrated of awards season. It's up for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. The momentum all started when it premiered at Cannes.
I've been working for almost a decade now. We're trying to work, and that was my ultimate dream, to go to Cannes, and we had a film in the main competition, and then we won, and that was crazy in itself and amazing. And so I don't know. I mean, I think everything that has followed has been an absolutely wonderful, pleasant surprise.
What is it like having this kind of success with the film? What's going through your head with all that?
I think I'm just processing it. I know that I'm incredibly overjoyed, honored and humbled that our film is being recognized in this way. But I'm processing. It's overwhelming and amazing and all of the things.
No, I don't speak Russian, but I know Russian.
Mikey Madison is fast becoming one of Hollywood's most talked about young actors. The film's writer and director, Sean Baker, had seen her on screen before and wrote the part of Annie especially for her.
She's so unique in not only her physicality, but there's something about her aura. There's something about... She's actually quite subdued. But then suddenly she can explode like no other person I've ever seen, like no other actor I've ever seen.
What?
It was incredible to watch.
As an actor, sometimes I felt like I was shooting a very romantic film, and sometimes it was like almost like a horror film or a drama or a slapstick comedy. And to navigate through my character with all of those different genres was fun. It was a challenge, and I liked it.
She's been BAFTA nominated and Oscar nominated.
I am Yvonne's wife!
Which means 2025 could be an extraordinary breakthrough year.
I like Anora.
For Mikey Madison.
It's a good name.
Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
We have some breaking news to bring you now that we are getting from Sweden, that there is a situation between police at a school, we understand, in a town called Örebro. Now, that is between Gothenburg and Stockholm. We understand the school under lockdown at the moment. Reuters news agency is reporting that 4 people have been shot at the school, but their condition is not known. So Reuters saying 4 people have been shot and they are not sure what the condition of those people is. But the school has been on lockdown as a result. A large amount of police are obviously present at the scene. We're looking into this for you and we'll certainly bring you more just as soon as we get it. But the latest from Sweden, from the town of Örebro, that there has been an incident there. 4 people, according to Reuters, have been shot. Their condition not known at this stage. Hundreds of administrative staff at the Metropolitan Police here in London are beginning a 2-week strike over changes to the force's work from home policy. It's thought nearly 2,500 workers could be affected by the plans. The Met said they were designed to provide consistency across the force. Are you a simmer? The Sims is one of the best-selling video game series of all time, with an active community of superfans. It allows players to build their dream homes, design digital avatars, and live out endless virtual lives. Well, the game is 25 years old, and to celebrate its anniversary, an original version of the game is being re-released so that gamers can indulge in a bit of nostalgia. And just finally, a photograph of the Princess of Wales taken by her 6-year-old son, Prince Louis, has been released to mark World Cancer Day. Here's the picture. It was said by Kensington Palace to reflect how spending time in nature has been important to the princess, who announced last month that she's in remission from cancer. The image, you can see a frosty woodland taken, we understand, in Windsor in recent weeks. Good to have you with us on BBC News Now. Thanks for watching.